Well, you know what's fun? Being outside on Saturday, enjoying the wonderful weather and going for walks, having a bonfire with my family. Oh my God, that was so awesome. And then Sunday, getting all of the snow. Yeah, that's that's awesome. That's awesome. The only time that we can leave our house is when it's nice outside, and so why not? Just dump snow on us so that we can't even leave. So, what we're going to be talking about today is the next step once you've been doing some research. So, there is a couple things I do want to point out. Number one, the research that you're doing should not be done. Like, if you have four sources and you think you're done, that's not right. Because a research paper, any type of research means you're going to be doing more work than you actually use. And so ultimately, if you only end up using four sources, that means you've probably read at least six or seven, sometimes closer to eight. So you will be reading more than you will end up using. But that's good because then you use the best information. So this week we're still going to be doing, it's still research time. So it's not, we're not hanging out and kind of like, or excuse me, we are not going to stop doing research just because Ms. Hain has checked to make sure you have at least four sources annotated. Again, that shouldn't be the end of your research. You should be continuing to do your research. You should also continue to utilize your digital note cards. Like I told you in the previous video, I will be popping in on those and just checking to make sure that you've been updating and changing based on the research that you've been finding. So your research isn't done. I think that you should continue to do research for the next week. Um, but in the midst of doing that research, you're also going to be taking a look at the research that you're using. And that's why we are going to be, you're going to be completing and doing an annotated bibliography. An annotated bibliography is, first of all, there's a difference between a bibliography and a works cited page. Now, you've all done works cited pages, and I know that for a fact because you've all written a research paper in ninth grade. I know you've done that. So, like, you know what a works cited page. That's where you cite the actual work that you've used in your paper. A bibliography is different because a bibliography is like all of the information that you've read. It doesn't mean that you've used all of these sources. It simply means that these are sources that were helpful or integral in narrowing down your research. So, an annotated bibliography is where you spend some time analyzing very closely the resources that you're reading right now. Okay? So, I'm going to be looking in the packet. I can't remember what page this is on, but it's in the packet. So, the annotated bibliography. Okay, what this video is it's strictly about what the annotations of the bibliography are, and then I'll talk to you later this week about works cited, how to actually do that. Okay, so an annotated bibliography at the top of the page here. So what it is it's a list of your citations, any documents, articles, anything that you're using. Now, for each citation, what you do is you typically have like a brief um, description or evaluation of those sources or of that source. So that's the annotation. Okay. The purpose of the annotation is to inform your reader, which is me, about your source itself. So I have just kind of skimmed through some of your sources, your annotation, or excuse me, I haven't read your sources. I've skimmed them. I've looked over some of your like the markings that you did on your page. What the annotation does is it shows me that you understand the complexities of the source itself. Okay, and I'll get into that a little bit more in just a second here. What I do want to point out is that when you do an annotated bibliography, the paragraph that you have underneath the citation is not an abstract. An abstract, that's literally just a summary. That's what the abstract is. But an annotation, that's where you describe and you critically analyze the source that you're using. So you're going to be paying attention to perhaps like what you're going to be articulating to me, your reader. What is the point of view of this article? You're going to clarify points in the article. You are going to take a look at the authority, perhaps the whether or not there is bias, which means that's the appropriateness of expression. So you also might be asking, like, why do I need to do this? Ms. Hain, you've already seen my sources. Yes, I have, but a couple things. Number one, we're living in a time period, unfortunately, where people get information and they know very little about the information whatsoever. For example, they just had on the news last week that there was misinformation going around about how African Americans they cannot get COVID-19. That's not true. Everyone is possible of getting COVID-19 or coming down with that. However, without looking critically at the information that's being provided to us, we are more likely to be misinformed, and that misinformation could quite possibly be deadly. And so what you're going to be doing, and the reason that you're doing an annotated bibliography is it requires you to think critically about your sources. So just because you have a piece of information that's been published doesn't mean that you should trust it. I mean, like, I can publish anything I want, especially if it's a non-peer-reviewed source. You need to be really, really careful. The other thing is that it shows that you've actually read through the sources, okay? So, and when I was in college, I had to do annotated bibliographies quite a bit to convey to my professors and my instructors that I've read the sources, that I understand the sources, and I've got a plan for them. Like, I've read them critically and I know what information is coming out of these sources, okay? So when we do an annotated bibliography, there are multiple things that are in an annotation. So you do generally summarize the central theme and scope. This says scope, meaning like, what is this about? Like, if you're talking about marijuana use, is it marijuana use in people ages like 18 to 34? Is it in marijuana use of people in a certain area in the United States? Is it even in the United States? So like, you're telling me what is the major ideas that are being presented in the research that's been done? How did they do this research? Then you also need to provide a little bit of the following. You can evaluate the authority or the background of the source. So making sure that you understand why this person is credible or perhaps not credible. Comment on the intended audience, meaning like, who is this written for, like, and how do you know it was written for them? So if you're talking about the juvenile justice system, then who is it written for, and how do you know it was written for them? Is it written for lawyers? Is it written for social activists? Is it written for former inmates? So who is it written for? The other thing too is that take a look at how the sources work together. So if I'm doing an annotated bibliography on two sources, maybe one of them I'm going to compare with the other. Like, this source talks about reasons that we should go to Mars, and this source talks about reasons we shouldn't go, and so I can use them to compare, like, the discussion that's currently happening. Or you could tell me, how are you going to use this source? Especially for those of you that have commented that some of your sources are kind of dated. Is there a reason that you're using these dated sources? You might want to articulate that. So when you're writing your annotated bibliography, your annotation has this material in it. Okay, it's not very long. It's approximately 150 words long. Okay. So if you take a look, here's a sample of one annotated bibliography. So I do this citation, which, like I said, I will tell you about and I'll talk to you about later. But then this is the information that I would include. So I talk about who the author is, I talk about how this is credible, and then I kind of summarize what's going on and the information of how I could use it. So this is how long it's going to be. And if you take a look at the bottom here, I don't know if you can really see it, that's 144 words long. Okay, so that's how long typically an annotated bibliography is. All right, so you are going to end up having multiple um, annotation or multiple citations in your annotated bibliography. A reminder that just because something's in your annotated bibliography, it does not mean you have to use it. It just means that you've read this source, you're analyzing this source. What it also means is that if you get your annotated bibliography done on Thursday and then you just kind of like do a little bit more research and you find another source on Saturday, don't worry about including it in your annotated bibliography. It is just you making sure you're telling Ms. Hain, I'm going through the process of analyzing the importance, the relevance, the authority, the credibility of my sources. So, um, yeah, annotated bibliographies, that's what we're working on next.